History is often told in the thunder of battles and the glory of emperors. But when night falls and silence spreads, another story emerges, a quieter one. Beyond Rome's marble forums and grand triumphs, there were men who stood watch where the empire ended. Their lives were not carved in stone or sung in victory parades, but whispered in the cold winds of the frontiers. These were the forgotten guards of Rome, stationed far from the capital, holding lonely posts along rivers, forests, and deserts. Their struggles, their secrets, their small rituals of survival, these are the threads that wove the fabric of Rome's endurance. Tonight, we walk into their world, slowly, gently, as if we too are keeping the night watch with them. Part 1. The first watch on the edge of the world. The frontier was not where glory lived. It was where duty began and never seemed to end. Picture the northern boundaries of the Roman world, vast rivers like the Rhine and Danube, cutting through mist-draped landscapes. To the south lay the cultivated heartlands of Rome. To the north, thick forests, shifting tribes, and the endless unknown. It was here that young recruits arrived, far from the warmth of Italian sun, their sandals crunching on gravel paths that led toward wooden palisades and stone watchtowers. For most, this was their first glimpse of the edge of the empire. The frontier did not greet them with triumphal arches or cheering crowds. Instead, it welcomed them with silence, with the smell of damp earth, and resin from freshly cut timber, and the steadiest groaning river whose current marked the divide between Rome and the others. The legionaries came with packs heavy on their backs, carrying not only weapons, but the invisible burden of years to be spent here, years of marching, drilling, patrolling, waiting. Imagine a recruit standing on the banks of the Danube as dusk settles. The sky, wide and heavy, folds itself into shades of gray and pale blue. Across the river, shadows move, sometimes deer slipping into the water, sometimes the figures of tribesmen watching from the opposite bank. The young soldier breathes deeply. He is no longer in the world of farms and markets. He is in the place where Rome meets resistance, and where endurance is the only victory most will ever know.
Nice.
Life begins with the first watch. The cohort commander assigns posts. The recruit learns what it means to guard not just the empire, but also his own thoughts. Hours pass slowly at the palisade, the torches flickering, the sound of the river constant. The soldier's eyes grow tired, scanning the darkness, where the difference between a trick of moonlight and the movement of enemies is often impossible to tell. Fear is a quiet companion, always close, never gone. The veterans know this rhythm well. They've stood through storms that made the ramparts groan, and through winter nights where ice clung to every nail in their armor. They teach the recruits how to listen, not with the ears, but with the body. A fox stepping on dry twigs sounds different from a man. The river shifting under ice whispers in another voice altogether. To survive here is not about swinging a sword. It is about learning the subtle language of a borderland that never rests. By day, the camp comes alive with drills and construction. Rome's power was not just in its armies, but in its discipline. Even on the farthest frontiers, soldiers laid roads, built watchtowers, repaired fortifications. For every hour spent with weapons, there were many spent hauling stone, cutting timber, digging ditches. To a recruit, this was the surprise. The sword was only part of the life. The shovel, the axe, the hammer were equally essential. Yet within this rhythm of work and watch, small comforts appeared. A campfire, after a long patrol, a letter read aloud from home, a shared joke between comrades. These things did not erase the isolation, but they softened it. The frontier was less about conquest and more about endurance. Day after day, night after night, the soldier learned that survival meant finding meaning in repetition, in duty, in the bonds forged with those who endured beside him. There were moments of tension, of course. Alarms sounded when raiding parties tested the river crossing. Torches were lit, horns blew, and men rushed to their posts. But often, the danger melted back into the trees before steel met steel. The soldier's fear became a strange cycle, peaking with the alarm, then fading into anticlimax, leaving only the pounding of his own heart. It was not glorious, but it was real. Food was another reality. Rations of bread, cheese, salted meat, sometimes beans or onions, sometimes fish pulled from the river. The taste of Rome reached even here, but in simpler, harsher form. The bread was hard, the wine often sour, but it was sustenance. Soldiers sometimes bartered with locals, exchanging coins or trinkets for fresh game or milk. These small exchanges were moments of humanity across the frontier line, brief encounters that reminded both sides that beyond politics and war, people shared the same hunger and the same need for warmth. At night, when the camp quieted, the stars became companions. The recruits looked upward, wondering if the same constellations shone over their distant homes. For many, this was the first time they felt the vastness of Rome not as a power, but as a distance. The empire was immense, but so too was the gap between the capital S splendor and a soldier S lonely post at the edge. The first winter tested every man. Snow piled against the wooden walls, the river froze in jagged patterns, and the wind seemed to claw at exposed skin. Fires were kept burning, cloaks wrapped tightly, but cold still seeped into bones. It was in these months that the soldier truly understood the meaning of endurance. Each dawn was not about conquest, but about surviving to nightfall, and each night about holding on until dawn. And yet, through this slow rhythm, something settled in the heart of the soldier. He became part of the landscape, part of the pulse of the frontier itself. The fears dulled, the work became routine, and the constant waiting turned into a strange kind of stillness. This was life at the edge of Rome. Not glorious, not easy, but steady. A soldier learned to find strength not in the promise of triumph, but in the quiet act of simply standing, watching, enduring. The frontier taught patience. It taught silence. It taught the kind of resilience that history rarely remembers, but which kept the empire's borders intact for centuries. And as a recruit finally adjusted to the endless watch, he became one of Rome's forgotten guardians, his life swallowed by duty.
Yes.
His struggles known only to the river, the forest, and the wind. Part 2. The arrival at the edge of empire. The journey to the frontier was long. For many recruits, it began not with a march, but with a summons. Somewhere in the Italian countryside in Gaul, or in the provinces along the Danube, a young man heard the call of the empire. Sometimes he joined willingly, chasing the promise of pay and glory. Sometimes he was urged by family, or by debt, or by the quiet pressure of poverty. And sometimes the recruiters came, marking names, taking those who were fit, those whose arms showed strength, whose bodies could endure. The oath was sworn, and with it his life was bound to Rome. Imagine one of them. Let us give him no name, for he could be anyone. He leaves a small farm in Latium, or perhaps a bustling town along the Rhine. The morning he departs, the sky is still dark, the earth damp with dew. A mother places bread in his hands. His father says little, perhaps only nods. He sets off on the road, walking into a future that will take him far from the fields he once knew. He does not yet know the sound of barbarian tongues, the sight of snow piled against the ramparts, or the long silences of the watchtower at night. But all of this awaits him. The march to the frontier was no gentle journey. The Roman army prided itself on movement, and soldiers learned early that their legs were their greatest weapon. A legion could cover 20 miles in a day, carrying packs that weighed as much as a modern traveler's suitcase. Inside these packs were rations, cooking tools, a cloak, stakes for fortifications, and spare sandals. The burden was heavy, but the empire moved because men carried it. As the new recruits walked, they would see the world change around them. First, the familiar heartlands of Rome, with paved roads, milestones, villas, and towns buzzing with trade. But as the march pushed outward, things grew quieter. The roads narrowed, the villas grew sparse. Then finally, the frontier itself rose up before them, a world where Rome's order ended and another land began. Reaching a frontier fortress must have been overwhelming. Picture the soldier's first sight of the fort: massive walls of stone or timber, gates reinforced with iron, towers rising at intervals. Inside, the sound of hammers rang from the smithies. The smell of bread drifted from the ovens, and everywhere men moved with purpose. To step through the gates was to step into another Litha world, enclosed, disciplined, and ordered. The fort itself was a small city. Streets ran in a grid, lined with barracks, workshops, storehouses, and stables. At the center lay the Principia, the headquarters, where standards were kept and orders issued. Nearby stood the commander's house, larger and more ornate than the rest, with tiled roofs and painted walls. For the ordinary soldier, the barracks became home. Long, narrow rooms where 10 men shared a space with straw mattresses, oil lamps, and the constant company of comrades. Privacy was unknown, but companionship was unavoidable. The first days on the frontier must have been strange. The recruit was given his gira helmet, often of iron or bronze, with cheek guards that narrowed his vision but protected his face, cuirass, sometimes of chainmail, sometimes of segmented plates, fitted awkwardly until he grew used to it. A rectangular shield, heavy and solid, painted with bright insignia, and of course the weapons, the short gladius, built for stabbing, and the pilum, the heavy throwing spear designed to bend on impact, making it useless for the enemy. Each piece of equipment had its weight, its smell, its burden. Together, they became the soldier's skin, as familiar to him as the clothes he once wore at home. Training began almost at once. The drill masters were relentless, their voices echoing across the parade ground. Marching in step, turning in unison, throwing the pilum until the arm ached. Practicing the thrust of the gladius again and again. There was little romance in its homely repetition, but the army believed in discipline above all else. Soldier drilled into obedience was more reliable than one who fought only from courage. Courage could fail. Discipline endured. And then there was the wall of the frontier itself. For those stationed along the Rhine or the Danube, the river was the border, wide and slow, carrying barges and patrol boats. On the far side lay forests, misty and endless, where tribes lived beyond Roman law. For those sent north to Britannia, the wall of Hadrian stretched across hills and valleys, stone and turf dividing one world from another. Standing watch atop such barriers, the soldier saw both sides. Behind him, the order of Rome. Before him, the unknown. At night, the recruit must have felt the weight of distance. Letters traveled slowly, if at all. Home was far, perhaps unreachable. Fires burned in the barracks. Men told stories. Dice clicked on the floor. But when the voices quieted, the silence grew deep. Outside the walls, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying sounds that were neither Roman nor familiar. In those moments, a soldier might feel both proud and small one among many yet alone. But life on the frontier was not only hardship. There were markets outside the forts, where local traders sold food, wine, and trinkets. Civilian settlements often grew nearby, with families, craftsmen, and sometimes even inns and bathhouses. A soldier could walk through the gates and find a slice of comfort, a hot meal, a jug of beer, a conversation in a tongue that mixed Latin with local words. Friendships were made, sometimes loves were found. Though marriage was officially restricted for soldiers until later centuries, many formed unofficial families, leaving behind children who lived in the shadow of the walls. Still, the rhythm of duty always returned. The watchtowers needed manning, the patrols needed walking, the drills needed repeating. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into seasons. Winter brought biting winds, snow clogging the roads, and the endless task of keeping fires burning. Summer brought dust, sweat, and the buzzing of insects along the rivers. Through it all, the soldier learned the truth. The frontier was less about glory and more about endurance. And endurance left its mark. Bones unearthed from old forts show the toll of heavy loads, the strain of endless marching, the scars of old wounds. Yet these same remains show resilience. Men who lived long lives, often healthier than the peasants who stayed behind in the countryside. For all its burdens, the army gave food, shelter, and a steady place in the world. So, what was it really like to be a Roman soldier on the frontier? It was to stand between two worlds, Rome's ordered heart and the restless lands beyond. It was to live in constant readiness, never knowing when the alarm might sound. It was to share life so closely with comrades that one man's fate became everyone's. And it was to feel, in the quiet hours, that one was part of something vast, yet fragile. The recruit who first walked through the gates of the fortress changed in those early months. His body grew hardened, his stride steadier, his gaze more accustomed to distance. The boy who once left his family behind had become in habit, if not yet in spirit, a soldier of Rome. The frontier would shape him further through battle, through ritual, through the small routines that filled his days. But the transformation had begun, and there was no turning back. As the campfires burned low, as the walls loomed dark against the night sky, he lay on his straw mattress, listening to the breathing of those around him. Outside, the river flowed, as it always had, marking the edge of empire. He closed his eyes, knowing tomorrow would bring more drills, more duties, more weight upon his shoulders. And yet beneath it all, he must have felt a quiet certainty. For better or worse, he was now Rome's guard, stationed where the empire met the unknown. Part 3. Daily Rhythms of the Camp. The life of a Roman soldier on the frontier was not always filled with drama or clashing swords. In fact, most days passed in an order so predictable that they blurred into one another, like the steady flow of a river. There were tasks, duties, and routines that bound the soldier's time together, shaping his existence into a rhythm as steady as the march of boots on gravel. To understand the Roman frontier, one must first understand that it was built not on constant war, but on constancy itself, the daily rituals of men who lived far from home, repeating the same motions until they became a kind of second nature. The morning began before the sun had fully risen. A bugle, its sharp call cutting through the fog, would stir the men awake. Some rose slowly, pulling their cloaks tighter against the lingering chill. Others had already trained themselves to sit upright the moment the sound pierced the silence. In wooden barracks, or sometimes tents if the camp was temporary, men would shuffle into their sandals and gather their gear. The smell of damp wool cloaks mixed with the faint odor of last night's fire. Outside, the sky often wore shades of pale blue or gray, promising either rain or another clear day. The first task was inspection. The centurion, stern and observant, walked the rows of soldiers, checking their equipment. Armor was to be polished, weapons sharp, shields repaired. Even on the quietest frontier where no enemy lurked nearby, discipline was constant. A soldier whose sword dulled or whose sandals fell apart was not merely neglectful. He endangered the whole unit. These inspections were a reminder that the Roman army was built on preparedness, strength lying not only in numbers, but in the certainty that every man was ready. After inspection came physical training. Soldiers marched around the camp's perimeter, their shields strapped to their arms, their wooden swords, heavier than real ones, clutched in hand. They thrust, parried, and swung, muscles straining, sweat gathering on brows despite the morning's coolness. To train with weapons heavier than those used in battle was a deliberate choice, designed to make real combat feel easier by comparison. Alongside this, men practiced throwing the pilum, the Roman javelin. Its iron tip was designed to bend upon impact, preventing the enemy from throwing it back. Each cast was a lesson in precision, for a soldier's effectiveness relied on his ability to strike before the enemy closed in. The sound of training filled the air, the clash of wood, the barked orders of centurions, the rhythmic stomp of boots. Villagers from nearby settlements sometimes watched from a distance, reminded of the power Rome carried even in its farthest corners. For the soldiers themselves, this daily training was a reminder of their identity. They were not farmers, nor traders, nor simple wanderers. They were guardians of Rome's order, and their lives were shaped by drills that reinforced unity, discipline, and the sense of belonging to something larger. As the morning moved toward midday, duties shifted. Some men were assigned to guard duty, patrolling the camp's gates or walking the perimeter walls. Others took on building and maintenance work, repairing roads, digging ditches, or raising new fortifications. The Roman army was as much a workforce as it was a fighting force. Wherever they went, soldiers left behind the mark of Rome roads paved with stone, bridges stretching across rivers, forts with sturdy walls. In this sense, the rhythm of the camp extended outward into the landscape itself. What might seem like idle construction was, in truth, a form of conquest, for each road and wall extended Rome's grip on the frontier. Meals, though modest, broke up the day. Soldiers cooked their own food, often a porridge of grains, beans, or lentils. Meat was rarer, reserved for special occasions or when hunting provided fresh game. Bread was baked in communal ovens, its smell drifting across the camp. Water was fetched from nearby rivers or wells, sometimes flavored with vinegar to purify and refresh it. Meals were not feasts, but moments of fellowship. Around the fire, men shared stories, jokes, and memories of home. It was here, in these quieter hours, that bonds were strengthened not through orders and drills, but through laughter and shared hardship. The afternoon was given to specialized tasks. Some soldiers practiced archery, while others worked on engineering projects. A camp always had craftsmen among the ranks, smiths who repaired weapons, carpenters who shaped wood, masons who cut stone. In a sense, the Roman camp was a small city, sustained by the skills of its own inhabitants. To keep the rhythm unbroken, each man had his place and responsibility. Religious observances also marked the flow of time. At shrines within the camp, offerings were made to the gods Mars for war, Jupiter for protection, and the spirits of the emperors who were honored like divine patrons. Soldiers believed that Rome's fortune was bound to these gods, and that neglecting them could invite disaster. Small rituals, pouring a libation of wine, burning incense, saying a prayer before a statue were woven into the day. To modern eyes, they may seem small, but to the men on the frontier, they were threads that held together the fabric of certainty. Evenings brought a gradual softening of pace. The training and building quieted, the sun dipped lower, and shadows stretched long across the camp. Guard duty still rotated, for the camp was never left unprotected, but most men gathered for a final meal. Fires flickered, their glow illuminating tired faces. Some soldiers mended clothing or repaired gear. Others played games, dice thrown onto wooden boards, laughter breaking out when fortune turned. Music, too, found its way into camp life, with flutes or simple string instruments offering soft melodies to the dusk. The rhythm closed with nightfall. Watchmen took their posts, standing against the dark, as guardians of all who slept within. In the barracks, men wrapped themselves in cloaks, lying close together on wooden bunks. The sounds of the camp shifted from the clamor of training and work to the quiet murmur of voices fading into dreams. In those dreams, perhaps they wandered the roads of home or imagined futures beyond the frontier. Yet the next day would come, and the bugle would sound again, and the rhythm would begin anew. This constancy was both burden and comfort, because the monotony could weigh heavily on men far from family and familiar lands. Comfort, because in the sameness lay stability. Rome's strength did not rest only in victories, but in the patience of its soldiers, who kept the order day after day, year after year. When we look back at the Roman frontier, it is tempting to imagine it as a place of constant conflict, where soldiers lived on edge, swords always ready. But more often than not, life was shaped by routine, the drills, the duties, the rituals, and the quiet moments shared between men. These rhythms were the hidden heartbeat of Rome, the steady pulse that allowed the empire to endure. Without them, the frontier would have crumbled, and Rome's greatness might never have reached so far. So, if you close your eyes now, perhaps you can hear it. The bugle's call at dawn, the stomp of boots, the clatter of wooden swords, the crackle of fires at night. A rhythm repeated across hundreds of camps, thousands of soldiers, and centuries of time. Rhythm so steady that even now, in the silence of ruined forts and abandoned roads, it seems to linger, like an echo of lives lived in service to an empire. Part 4. Life beyond the walls. Beyond the fortress gates lay a different world. While the Roman soldier's life was framed by barracks, drill squares, and patrols, beyond the timber palisades and stone towers stretched the landscapes that made up their true surroundings. For those stationed on the empire's far edges, the forests of Germania, the highlands of Britannia, the deserts of Syria, life beyond the walls was not merely background, but a constant presence shaping their days and thoughts. In this scene, we wander gently outside the camp, following the soldiers as they encounter villagers, landscapes, and the subtle blending of Roman life with local traditions. When the sentries opened the gates at dawn and the watchword was passed, Men with errands often stepped beyond the military's ordered world. Some went to trade with local farmers, others carried official messages to nearby towns, and a few simply walked out on leave to catch a glimpse of something less rigid than the camp's geometry. Beyond the ditch and rampart, the first thing they often heard was birdsong, more varied and free than the trumpets and signals inside. It was a reminder that, no matter how disciplined Rome's grip seemed, the land around them still beat to its own rhythm. For many soldiers, encounters with local people were at once routine and filled with quiet meaning. Villagers arrived near the camp's gates to sell fresh produce, hides, or crafted goods. A legionary, his helmet set aside, might bend down to inspect a basket of apples or listen to a farmer explain the merits of a new wool cloak. Communication was not always smooth Latin mixed with native tongues, gestures often serving where words faltered. Yet trade itself created a language both sides understood. Coins changed hands, smiles were exchanged, and a soldier returned inside with food or cloth that reminded him of a life less bound by rations. Some men formed deeper connections. Though official law forbade soldiers to marry until discharge, relationships often grew nonetheless. A centurion might be known in a village for his regular visits, his presence tolerated or even welcomed, for soldiers brought coin and stability. Children born of these unions sometimes grew up half in the camp, half in the settlement, living proof that Rome's frontiers were not solid barriers but porous edges where lives overlapped. When excavations uncover tiny shoes or household trinkets near fortresses, they whisper of such blended households. Beyond personal ties, there was always the landscape itself. For a soldier used to the warmth of Italy, the chill mists of northern Britain could feel otherworldly. Arching beyond the walls on patrol, he might watch the fog lift slowly from the hills, revealing stone circles or grassy barrows whose builders were long forgotten. In the east, the desert shimmered by day and froze by night, the stars so sharp that even hardened veterans felt small beneath them. These environments tested the army's adaptability. Roads had to be built across marsh or sand, supplies carried through forests or dunes. Yet for the individual soldier, walking just beyond the fort, they also offered moments of unexpected beauty. A wildflower glimpsed by the ditch, a deer startled into motion, a sudden stillness broken only by wind. These details stitched themselves into memory. Life beyond the walls was not always peaceful. Bandits prowled borderlands, and tribes beyond Rome's reach sometimes raided settlements. Soldiers escorting traders or tax collectors learned to watch hedgerows, wary of sudden ambush, yet danger itself fostered a sense of quiet vigilance. When a man left the fortress, he did so with his dagger at his belt, and his eyes moving gently from track to tree line. The boundary between the safety of the camp and the uncertainty of the world outside was real, yet it sharpened their awareness of how fragile security could be. Religious life often spilled into these surroundings. While the camp held official shrines to Jupiter and Mars, soldiers often left offerings at local sacred places. A spring outside the walls, clear and cold. This might have a cluster of small altars around it, dedications to Roman gods, but also to local spirits. Soldiers, pragmatic as they were, saw little contradiction. If a native deity protected the water, why not offer thanks? In this way, Roman and local beliefs blended, and the frontier became a mosaic of shared reverence. Even a soldier far from home could pause beside a stream, whisper a prayer, and feel part of something older than the empire itself. Economically, the presence of soldiers transformed the world beyond the walls. Camps created demand grain, meat, leather, wine, oil, all needed in steady supply. Villages near forts grew into bustling towns, markets thriving where once only pasture lay. Soldiers on leave wandered these streets, browsing stalls, listening to street musicians, or visiting taverns. For locals, Roman pay brought prosperity. For soldiers, the towns offered escape from barrack life, a chance to sit on a bench with a cup of warmed wine and watch the world move by. In quieter hours, soldiers sometimes ventured farther, exploring hills or fishing along rivers. Diaries that survive in fragments speak of such moments. A line about the beauty of a valley, or a complaint about biting flies near a marsh. These glimpses remind us that beyond the wars and politics, soldiers were still men noticing the world around them, storing away memories. A sunset over the Rhine, a storm rolling across the desert, a woodland clearing bright with snowdrops all were part of their lived experience, though unrecorded in official histories. There were also unspoken tensions. Local populations could resent Rome's presence, taxes, and demands. Soldiers might feel the edge of this hostility in guarded glances, or in the knowledge that once friendly villages could harbor raiders. Trust was fragile, though never absent. Some soldiers learned local words, others shared meals in villagers' homes. Step by step, mistrust softened, though never fully vanished. The frontier was always a place of negotiation, where Rome's order met local ways of life. As dusk approached, life beyond the walls often grew more atmospheric. Smoke curled from village hearths, lamps flickered in windows, and the sounds of livestock drifted through the air. Soldiers heading back to the camp would look over their shoulders, glimpsing scenes that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. For men who had left Italian farms or Mediterranean coasts, these rural rhythms echoed their own homelands, even if the accents and customs differed. Home felt far away, yet close in spirit. Returning through the gates, the soldier re-entered the ordered world. The clang of armor, the call of duty. Yet something of the outside remained with him, the memory of a friendly trader. The scent of pine from a nearby forest. The sight of children laughing by the road. These impressions softened the harshness of military life, grounding the soldier in the land he guarded. For the frontier was not just a line on a map, but a living landscape of people, places, and stories woven into daily existence. Thus, life beyond the walls was a blend of tension and trust, strangeness and familiarity. The soldier stood between two worlds, inside the camp of Rome, outside the enduring life of the frontier. In the space between them, a quiet coexistence grew. Markets thrived, friendships formed, beliefs mingled. When as seasons turned, soldiers found that their memories of service were shaped as much by these encounters beyond the walls as by their drills within them. The fortress may have been their duty, but the land beyond was their experience, their connection to something larger than Rome's orders. It was a reminder that even in the farthest reaches, life was never only about war, it was also about living. Part 5. The Turning of Seasons. The frontier was a place where time moved differently. In the marble-clad cities of Rome, the passing of the year might be measured by festivals, by the opening of theaters, by the changing of magistrates, or by shipments of goods arriving from distant provinces. But here, far from the center, life was bound to the rhythm of the seasons. The soldiers of the frontier did not count their years so much in birthdays or official events, but in the small patient cycles of nature, the return of migrating birds, the first ice along the riverbanks, the thaw of spring mud and the dusty heat of summer. Spring came early in some years, with meltwater swelling the rivers until they surged against their banks. Soldiers would tramp out to repair the watchtowers nearest the floodplain, hauling stones or timbers to strengthen walls. For men used to rigid drills, the unpredictable surge of water was both a frustration and a reminder of their vulnerability. The river could undo in days what men had built over months, yet spring was also a time of relief. After the gray bitterness of winter, the meadows grew green again. Flowers pushed up from the thawed ground, and the stores of dried grains and salted meats could be supplemented with fresher fair wild greens. Fish more easily caught, even small game snared in the woods. In summer, the land changed again. The sun beat down heavily, drying the paths into hard, cracked lines of earth. Dust clung to sandals, to tunics, to armor. Soldiers patrolling the boundary would march with sweat dripping down their faces, the metal of their helmets turning hot under the glare. But summer was also the time when traders arrived more frequently, their carts rumbling into camp, bringing olive oil, wine, or cloth from distant regions. Children from nearby villages sometimes lingered by the gates, curious to see the soldiers' gear, perhaps daring each other to shout out greetings before scampering away in laughter. Garrison. which could feel isolated for long stretches, found new energy in this busy season, as roads cleared of mud made travel easier and contact with the wider world more frequent. Autumn carried with it a quiet shift of mood. The fields beyond the walls turned golden with harvest. Farmers worked quickly, cutting and binding stalks, knowing that winter's bite would not be far off. Soldiers, too, had their duties at this time. Supplies needed to be gathered, stored, and carefully measured. Grain shipments were stacked in granaries, dried meat prepared, cloaks and blankets issued. There was a rhythm to it, practiced and repeated year after year. The barracks smelled of smoke and wool as soldiers mended their garments or set aside cloaks newly issued by the quartermasters. Some men wrote letters, their script steady as they reassured families that they were well. Others sharpened blades, oiled leather, or polished shields, as if preparing not just for the cold, but for whatever uncertainties might come with it. And then winter arrived, slow at first, and then all at once. Frost crept along the timbers, turning every morning breath into mist. The river grew sluggish with ice along its edges, and snow fell in drifts that muffled the sounds of daily life. Marching in winter was harsh. The iron studs of sandals slipped on frozen ground. The weight of cloaks made movement heavy, and cold seeped through gloves until fingers stiffened. Yet winter was also strangely still, the world hushed under a blanket of white. In those months, the soldiers grew closer to one another. Fires burned long in the barracks, and men spoke more softly, sharing stories, singing songs of distant homelands, or sitting in companionable silence as the wind rattled against shutters. Season carried its own tests, its own consolations. The soldiers learned patience in spring, endurance in summer, preparation in autumn, and resilience in winter. And over the years, these cycles became the way they measured their lives. The conscript who had first arrived in late summer might count his service by saying, "I have seen 4 harvests here." The centurion might look back and mark his decades by winters survived, each one etching new lines into his face. But the seasons shaped not just the soldiers, they shaped the land itself. Forests thickened or thinned, rivers shifted course. New paths were worn where carts and patrols had passed again and again. Villages rose and fell with the cycles of harvest, and children grew up on the edges of the fort, watching the soldiers as part of the background of their lives. For some, the garrison was a distant authority, demanding tribute or enforcing rules. For others, it was simply part of the scenery, as constant as the changing of leaves or the return of migratory birds. And within the fort, rituals adapted to the seasons as well. In spring, small offerings of flowers might appear near shrines. In summer, the training fields filled with the sounds of clashing practice swords and shouted drills. In autumn, the kitchen smelled of stews, thickened with newly gathered crops. And in winter, the chapel or shrine might see more visitors, as men sought comfort in prayers, whispered against the cold. The turning of the seasons also reminded the soldiers of distance. Letters from Italy might describe vines heavy with grapes, while snow still covered the frontier. Or a man from the Mediterranean might recall the warmth of olive groves while trudging through mud in northern rains. These contrasts could be painful, but they also taught endurance, the quiet strength of adapting, of surviving one year to the next. For a Roman soldier, the empire was not merely its roads, walls, or governors. It was the steady passing of time marked in natural cycles, and the wearing of cloaks and the sharpening of blades. In the frost that crept across barracks walls and in the green shoots that pushed up after the thaw, the empire endured because its men endured, and its men endured because they bent themselves to the rhythm of the land. The seasons gave shape to their years. They reminded the soldiers that while Rome might seem eternal, life itself was fragile, always changing, always returning, in endless cycles of growth and decline. And so the soldiers kept watch through spring rains, summer heat, autumn harvest, and winter frost. Their lives bound not only to their duties but to the land itself, to its rhythms, its patience, its quiet reminders of time's passage. Part 6. Winter on the Frontier. The frontier was always a place of distance from Rome, distance from the comforts of home, distance from the warmth of family hearths. But in winter, that distance deepened, becoming almost infinite. The first sign of its arrival was not snow, though the northern winds carried whispers of it. Instead, it was the change in the air, a sharper bite in the mornings, a heaviness in the breath, a sense that the sun itself had grown weary and was rationing its light. Soldiers knew the signs well. They tightened their cloaks, pulled woolen hoods over their heads, and prepared themselves for the long months ahead. Morning on the frontier, in winter, came slowly, reluctantly. The pale sun often lingered low on the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the frozen ground. The men stirred from their barracks, their breath rising in white plumes that quickly dissolved into the air. The familiar routines of the camp did not vanish with the season, but they became harder, leathers stiffened in the cold. Water froze in clay jars, forcing soldiers to break the surface ice before washing or drinking. The earth, once pliant, now resisted the thrust of shovels, making even simple maintenance of the camp's ditches and palisades a struggle. Yet the Romans adapted. They always adapted. Fires burned longer in the watchtowers, fueled by carefully rationed stores of wood. Cloaks and tunics were layered, sometimes patched with fur from local animals hunted by the men themselves. The armory distributed extra gear where possible: scarves, mittens, woolen socks, though supplies were uneven. A soldier stationed on the German frontier might be better clothed for the snow than one posted further south, where cold rains soaked through leather and wool, leaving men shivering in damp clothes. Each winter was a test not just of discipline, but of endurance. Despite the hardship, there was a strange rhythm to the cold months. Work slowed. Campaigning season ended, and with it the prospect of long marches and sudden skirmishes in distant valleys. The soldier's world contracted inward, bounded by the walls of the fort and the reach of patrols, sent only to keep watch. This stillness created a different kind of atmosphere. The camp became quieter, the routines heavier, almost meditative. Food took on a deeper meaning in winter. Bread, porridge, and pulses were the staples, but the men longed for warmth above all. Stews were favored, slow-cooked over low flames in great iron pots. Meat was rare, often reserved for special days or distributed as rewards. But when it appeared, perhaps salted pork or dried venison, the entire barrack seemed to come alive with anticipation. The scent of cooking carried through the camp, mingling with the smoke of countless fires. Eating became not just nourishment, but a comfort against the cold. Some soldiers recalled the feasts of Rome, others the humble meals of their distant villages. For a few moments in the rising steam of a shared bowl, there was a sense of home. The cold also shaped how men passed their time. Dice games continued, though players blew on their hands to keep their fingers warm between throws. Storytelling became even more important. Flickering light of oil lamps and fire pits casting long shadows on the walls as voices carried tales of heroes, gods, and foolish officers. In these months, laughter seemed louder, echoing off stone and timber, not because it was more frequent, but because it was more necessary. In laughter, men kept the frost from creeping too deep into their spirits. But not all was cheerful. Winter also brought silence, and with silence, reflection. For many, it was the time when homesickness bit hardest. Letters, when they arrived, were treasures beyond measure, carried across frozen roads and over mountains by messengers who braved conditions as harsh as any soldier. A piece of parchment, a few words written by a wife, a brother, or a parent, these were enough to warm a man's heart for weeks. Others received no letters at all, and their silence grew heavier. Some tried to mask it with drink, with distraction, with bravado, but the eyes betrayed what the mouth denied. Patrols in winter were a particular kind of hardship. The land outside the walls seemed alien in the cold, stripped of color and sound. Trees stood bare, their branches clawing at gray skies. Streams ran sluggish beneath thin layers of ice. The ground crunched under boots, each step a reminder of how far they were from the softness of Roman roads. The soldiers trudged in silence, cloaks wrapped tightly, eyes scanning for signs of movement. Even the enemy seemed subdued by the season. Raids were fewer, skirmishes rarer, yet the danger never entirely vanished. A sudden attack in freezing weather could be devastating, the cold itself a weapon as deadly as any spear. The relationship between soldier and landscape changed in winter. Where once the land seemed hostile in its wildness, now it seemed indifferent, vast, and uncaring. The cold did not hate the soldiers, simply ignored them. Against such indifference, a man could feel very small indeed. This humility, this awareness of fragility, became part of the winter experience. Some found a strange peace in it, as if the silence of the season mirrored the silence within themselves. Religious rituals took on added weight. Soldiers made offerings to household gods and camp deities with renewed fervor, praying not just for victory, but for survival through the cold. Small altars glowed with the light of candles and oil lamps, their flames fragile yet defiant. Priests led ceremonies to Jupiter, Mars, and Mithras, invoking strength against both human foes and the biting frost. The mystery cult of Mithras, popular among soldiers, offered particular comfort with its symbolism of light defeating darkness. In underground Mithria, men gathered by torchlight, sharing sacred meals that bound them together in brotherhood. The warmth of ritual, both physical and spiritual, gave them courage against the season. And then there were the moments of stillness, the kind that lingered in memory long after campaigns and duties faded. A guard standing on the rampart in the dead of night, his breath clouding the air, stars glittering overhead like frozen sparks, a group of men huddled around a fire, their faces lit orange, sharing silence rather than words, each lost in thought yet united by presence. A morning when snow fell gently over the fort, muffling sound, transforming the harsh lines of stone and wood into something almost serene. These were the quiet gifts of winter, unnoticed by Rome's historians, but cherished by those who endured them. Winter also reminded soldiers of time's passage. Each year marked another cycle, another season endured. Veterans often spoke of winter's past, comparing storms, recalling hardships. It's measuring their service not in battles but in winters survived. To live through another meant to grow older, tougher, more seasoned. For some, it was a badge of honor. For others, it was a reminder of how many years they had been away from home. As the season deepened, the days grew shorter, the nights longer. Fires became central, not just for heat but for companionship. Around them, men talked of Rome, of its festivals, of Saturnalia, with its feasting and laughter. They imagined the lights of the city, the bustle of markets, the warmth of taverns. For a few moments in the circle of flame and shadow, they were transported there, if only in their minds. Then the fire burned low, the embers cooled, and the reality of the frontier returned. Yet, despite the hardships, winter was not only about endurance, it was also about resilience. Men discovered strength they did not know they possessed. They learned patience, found meaning in small comforts, and forged bonds with their comrades that would last beyond service. When the first signs of spring finally appeared, the softening of the ground, the trickle of thawed streams, the faint green of new growth, it was met with quiet gratitude. They had survived again. Winter on the frontier was not just a season, it was a teacher. It taught endurance, humility, the value of companionship, and the fragility of life. It stripped away distractions, leaving men face to face with themselves, their gods, and the vast silence of the world beyond Rome's reach. And as the cold loosened its grip, and the promise of warmer days spread across the land, soldiers felt a subtle shift within themselves. The frontier had not only tested them, had shaped them. The memory of winter would never fully leave, but neither would the lessons it brought. Part 7: Whispers of Gods and Emperors. Winter had begun to ease its hold, though the mornings still carried a chill, and the frost lingered in the corners where the sun reached only briefly. In the quiet rhythms of the frontier, as the men emerged from their barracks and resumed their patrols with lighter steps, another rhythm began to fill the air, the rhythm of voices, prayers, and rituals. Religion, in its many forms, was a constant companion for soldiers. It was in their gestures, their oaths, their whispered words before sleep. It wove through the fabric of daily life as naturally as breathing. To be a Roman soldier was not only to serve Rome, it was to live within a web of divine presence. The empire was vast, its provinces stretching across seas and mountains, and with them came gods of every kind. Some soldiers brought the deities of their childhood villages, household spirits who had once guarded a family hearth in Italy or Hispania. Others adopted the gods of the lands where they served, finding comfort in local rituals that spoke to the landscape around them. Always, above these many voices, were the official gods of Rome: Jupiter, Optimus, Maximus, Mars, Minerva, and the emperor himself, honored as the living embodiment of divine favor. The camp held its own sacred spaces. Near the Principia, the headquarters building, stood the standards, the legion's eagle, the signa of the cohorts. These were more than banners. They were holy objects, infused with the essence of the legion's honor. Each morning, soldiers gathered before them, offering salutes and prayers. The sight of the eagle, gleaming in the pale light, stirred a reverence deeper than fear of officers. To lose it in battle was unthinkable, a calamity greater than defeat itself. And so the standards became the heart of the camp, silent yet powerful witnesses to both triumphs and hardships. Not far from the standards, small altars smoked with incense. Offerings of grain, wine, and sometimes blood from sacrificed animals marked the cycles of days and months. The air would fill with the scent of burning herbs, mingling with the harsher odors of the camp. Priest, some official. Others, simply senior officers acting in religious roles, spoke words of invocation, asking for the gods' protection over the fort, the men, and their duties. For many, these rituals were a thread of continuity, binding them to Rome itself, reminding them that even in this distant corner, the empire's sacred order prevailed. Yet the soldiers' faith was not uniform. In the barracks, different shrines adorned the walls. One soldier might carve a small image of Mercury, god of travelers and luck, hoping for safe patrols and favorable fortune in gambling games. Another might keep a figurine of Venus, thinking of love or longing for home. In dark corners, painted images of Hercules or Apollo glowed faintly in lamplight. The diversity of belief was wide, yet it coexisted with little conflict. On the frontier, men cared less about which gods were invoked than about the comfort they provided. Among the most intriguing rituals was the cult of Mithras, carved deep into stone chambers, sometimes below the ground itself, were Mithria sacred meeting places for initiates. By torchlight, soldiers entered these hidden spaces, their footsteps echoing off stone, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and earth. Inside, they reenacted sacred meals, retelling the story of Mithras slaying the cosmic bull, an act that brought life and renewal to the world. The cult emphasized brotherhood, loyalty, and the triumph of light over darkness, all themes that resonated deeply with men who faced danger daily and endured the long nights of the frontier. To be initiated into Mithras's mysteries was to gain a bond with fellow soldiers that went beyond rank or origin. It was a fraternity of endurance, sealed by ritual and silence. Beyond these more formal rites, superstition colored every aspect of life. An unusual bird circling above the walls might be taken as a sign of fortune or doom. A dream vividly recalled in the morning could guide a man's decisions. Soldiers cast lots, read omens in the patterns of dice, and whispered charms before heading out on patrol. Even the smallest events, a dropped piece of bread, the sudden extinguishing of a lamp, might be interpreted as the voice of the divine. To live on the frontier was to live close to uncertainty, and in that uncertainty, superstition thrived. Alongside the gods walked the emperor. His name was spoken with reverence, his image displayed in statues and painted portraits within the Principia. Each oath sworn by soldiers invoked him as the guarantor of loyalty. Though distant, the emperor's presence was felt daily. His decrees shaped their service, his victories celebrated in ritual, his health prayed for in offerings. To curse the emperor was treason, but more than that, it was to sever oneself from the divine order Rome proclaimed. Whether loved or feared, the emperor was the living axis of their world. Yet among the soldiers, whispers sometimes carried doubts. Letters arrived slowly, and news of politics in Rome traveled at the pace of messengers. One emperor might be overthrown by another, one general raised up as Caesar, another struck down as a traitor. To the soldiers at the frontier, such changes felt distant, yet they mattered deeply. Who held power in Rome determined their rations, their pay, their very purpose in standing guard. And so around the fire, quiet conversations turned to the news. Was the emperor still secure? Was he favored by the gods? Would a new one bring better fortune or worse? Through all of this, the rituals continued. Festivals marked the calendar, even in the cold. Saturnalia brought laughter, games, and a temporary reversal of roles, where officers might jest with common soldiers, and the harshness of rank softened. Other festivals honored Mars, protector of soldiers, with offerings of blood and weaponry. Each event was both sacred and practical, reinforcing unity, lifting spirits, and reminding the men that they were part of something greater than their own small struggles. And in quiet moments, faith took on a gentler form. A soldier might kneel beside a small shrine in his barracks, whispering a prayer before bed. Another might carve a protective charm into wood, carrying it on patrol. Some wore amulets of bronze or bone, inscribed with words meant to guard against misfortune. In these small acts, faith became personal, intimate, woven into the fabric of daily life. As the days grew longer and the cold slowly retreated, the fort stirred with renewed energy. Patrols extended further. Repairs began on walls and roads damaged by frost. And in the midst of this labor, the soldiers continued to look upward to the sky, two omens, to the gods they trusted to watch over them. Religion was not a separate sphere of life, was the breath that filled each day, the whisper that reminded them of order in the midst of uncertainty. The empire's power did not rest on legions alone. It rested on belief that Rome was eternal, that the gods favored its cause, that the emperor embodied its destiny. On the frontier, where loneliness and danger pressed close, these beliefs were both fragile and resilient. Fragile because doubt could creep in with every hardship. Resilient because even the smallest ritual, the simplest prayer, could restore a sense of meaning. Gods were many, the emperor one, but together they formed the unseen companions of every soldier's march. Every watch on the wall, every whispered word in the night, that as spring advanced, and new life pushed its way through thawed earth, the soldiers found themselves renewed as well. Their faith, their rituals, their whispered prayers, they were not merely habit. They were a bridge, connecting the silence of the frontier to the vast order of Rome, binding the men to one another and to the empire they served. Part 8. The Shadow of Rebellion. The spring thaw had settled into summer warmth, and with it, the fort entered another rhythm. Grass grew tall beyond the ditches, birds nested in the rafters of barns, and the air carried the scents of damp earth and tilled fields. The soldiers welcomed the shift, for warmer days meant easier patrols, lighter clothing, and long evenings, when the sun lingered over the horizon. Yet beneath the surface of these seasonal changes, another rhythm pulsed quietly, rhythm of unease, of rumor, of distant unrest. It came like the faint tremor of thunder long before a storm arrives. The empire was vast, and the farther its edges stretched, the more fragile the connections became. Along the frontiers, garrisons like this one held not only walls, but also the empire's promise of order. Beyond those walls lived communities whose loyalty was never certain, farmers who paid their taxes reluctantly, tribes who traded when it suited them and resisted when it did not, chieftains who smiled in peace talks yet plotted behind closed doors. Rebellion, though often suppressed, was never truly absent. It lingered in the silence, waiting for opportunity. The first signs came as whispers among the merchants who passed through the gates. A caravan from the east spoke of villages refusing to pay tribute. A shepherd mentioned strange gatherings in the hills where young men trained with spears. A letter from a distant fort reported stolen supplies and missing patrols. Each story on its own seemed small, almost forgettable, yet together they wove a pattern that could not be ignored. For the soldiers, such rumors carried a particular weight. They knew that the frontier was always at risk, not just from invasions across the border, but from unrest within. The fort's commander held councils more frequently, speaking in hushed tones with his officers. Scouts were sent farther afield, riding out at dawn and returning late with reports of movements in the forests. The routines of the camp continued: drills, repairs, patrols, but now they were infused with tension. Every shadow seemed longer, every silence heavier. Rebellion, after all, did not always arrive with the clash of armies. Sometimes it crept slowly, like ivy winding its way up a wall. A missing shipment of grain, a burned watchtower on the road, a trader who did not return. Each incident added weight to the sense of unease. The soldiers felt it in their bones, though few spoke openly. To speak of rebellion too soon was to give it shape, and no one wanted to be the first to name the storm. Around the campfires, the conversations turned cautious. Some men recalled tales of past uprisings, villages rising against their tax collectors, legions called to march across mountains to crush a tribe, generals who won swift victories, but also those who were ambushed and lost entire cohorts. These stories carried lessons as well as warnings. The frontier was not simply a line to be guarded. It was a balance, fragile and shifting, between Rome's power and the people's endurance. Too much burden and resistance grew. Too much neglect and order dissolved. The soldiers wondered, had the balance tipped again? Beyond the fort's walls, life carried on, though with subtle changes. Farmers brought fewer goods to market, their carts lighter than before. Some spoke less readily with the guards, their eyes wary. Messengers took longer routes, avoiding certain villages. The roads, once busy, grew strangely quiet. The absence of noise was its own kind of warning. For the soldiers, this uncertainty was as draining as battle. At least in battle, the enemy was visible, the threat clear. In times like these, the danger lay in not knowing where the first strike would fall. It might be an ambush on a patrol, or a riot at a market, or an uprising that swept across villages like fire through dry grass. Each night, as the watch was set and the gates closed, the men carried that uncertainty with them. The commander sought to steady them with rituals and discipline. Inspections grew stricter, drills more frequent, offerings were made at the altars for the gods' protection, incense burning thick in the air. The standards were honored with greater ceremony, as though to remind the men of their unity. Yet even as they prayed, many wondered whether the gods were listening, or whether their fate would be decided by forces beyond divine favor. In moments of quiet, the soldiers' thoughts drifted to their families far away. What if rebellion spread, cutting off routes of communication? What if the empire itself grew weaker, unable to send reinforcements or pay? Such thoughts were rarely voiced, but they lingered, heavy as the humid air. For all their armor and weapons, soldiers were still men, subject to doubt, longing, and fear. And yet, the shadow of rebellion carried with it not only fear, but also a strange vitality. Patrols moved with sharper eyes, conversations grew more focused, and bonds between men tightened. The possibility of unrest reminded them of their role. It's not just as guards of a wall, but as the living thread between empire and frontier. They were the watchers, the ones who stood where order met uncertainty. On certain nights, the silence seemed too deep, the wind too still. The men on watch would glance toward the dark hills, imagining figures moving just beyond sight. In the barracks, others dreamed of fire, of shouting, of standards torn down. Dreams, omens, and waking thoughts blurred together, as though the shadow of rebellion lived not only outside the walls, but also within the soldiers' minds. Still, life carried forward. Grain was milled, weapons sharpened, armor polished. Letters were written, prayers whispered, dice cast in the barracks. The normalcy itself was a form of resistance, a way of declaring that, until the storm broke, the rhythms of Rome would endure. The soldiers clung to that rhythm, as one clings to a rope in swift water, steadying themselves against the unseen currents. The summer sun rose higher each day, warming the stones of the walls, filling the air with the hum of insects. And though the camp seemed as stable as ever, the soldiers knew somehow that change was coming. The shadow of rebellion stretched across the land, invisible yet undeniable, as if the earth itself had drawn in a long breath and was waiting for the moment to release it. When it would come, how it would come, no one could say. While the soldiers kept watch, their eyes scanning the horizon, their ears tuned to every whisper, their hearts braced for the storm that loomed unseen. Part 9. The March into Uncertainty. The shadow of rebellion had not yet broken into flame, but its weight pressed gently upon the fort, like clouds gathering before rain. There was no storm yet, only the awareness of its possibility. The commander knew that the best answer to whispers was presence to be seen upon the roads, to remind both allies and doubters that Rome's reach was still here, still steady. And so one morning, long before the mist had lifted from the river banks, the order was given to march. You can imagine the quiet stir of preparations carried out with practiced efficiency. Men rose in the dim light, tightening leather straps, checking the points of their spears, adjusting the weight of their shields. The barracks had its own rhythm at such times. The low murmur of voices, the metallic clink of buckles, the creak of belts drawn firm. Outside, mules stamped their hooves and snorted in the cool air, already laden with sacks of grain and bundles of gear. It was not a march to glory, but a march to remind, to endure, and to show that the empire had not forgotten its distant edges. At the gate the men formed into their column. Helmets caught the pale light of the rising sun, their bronze and iron glinting in soft hues of gold and silver. The air was still, heavy with dew, and when the gate opened, the world outside seemed vast in its quietness. Step by step, the column moved forward, shields resting against shoulders, spears angled neatly, their sandals falling in a rhythm that soon became like a heartbeat, steady and unbroken. The Roman road stretched before them, straight, unbending. It cut through fields and woods with a sense of purpose, as though laid by hands that had known no hesitation. Its stones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps and wheels, were lined with tufts of grass and dotted with patches where moss had crept into the cracks. Yet the road remained strong, a symbol of order imposed upon a landscape that could so easily shift back to wildness. For the soldiers, it was both reassurance and burden. Reassurance because the road was Rome's lasting mark upon the land. Burden because every step forward carried them farther from the safety of the fort, deeper into the unknown spaces where rumor and silence concealed intentions. The march had its own meditative rhythm. Each step pressed dust from the stones, small clouds rising and drifting away. The air filled with the faint jangle of iron fittings and the quiet shuffle of feet in unison.
Ow.
There was little conversation, only the occasional command passed down the line, or a word exchanged between men when the silence felt too heavy. Sometimes a soldier would hum softly under his breath, a tune carried from his childhood, almost lost beneath the rhythm of marching feet. Other times a brief laugh would ripple through the column when a mule balked stubbornly or a strap came loose at an inconvenient moment. Yet soon enough, the rhythm settled back into stillness, the march resuming like water flowing along its course. Villages appeared now and then along the road. Smoke rose from hearth fires, children peered from doorways, and farmers leaned on their tools to watch the column pass. The soldiers did not stop. Their task was presence, not intrusion. Shields shone, helmets gleamed, and the disciplined line itself carried the message Rome intended. To the villagers, this was reassurance for some, and a reminder for others. Rome was near, Rome was steady, Rome's watchful eyes had not turned away. To the soldiers, the faces that watched them carried a different message, a reminder that loyalty was fragile, that peace was always conditional, that the eyes which seemed respectful today could harbor resentment tomorrow. By midday, when the sun stood high, The commander called a halt beside a narrow stream that crossed beneath the road. The men unstrapped their burdens with quiet relief, stretching their arms and backs. They knelt by the water, splashing their faces, filling leather flasks, letting the coolness run down dry throats. Mules grazed lazily on the grass, while fires were kindled for a simple meal. Bread was broken, its crust hard but filling. Dried figs and strips of salted pork were passed from hand to hand. The meal was not grand, yet shared food always carried comfort. The men chewed slowly, resting their legs, but even here spears remained close, and helmets rested within reach. Rest on the frontier was never without vigilance. When the signal came, they rose once more, lifting packs, tightening straps, reforming the column. The march resumed, this time into stretches of forest where the trees pressed close on either side of the road. The air grew cooler beneath the canopy. The light filtered into shifting patterns of green and gold. In this half-shadow, every sound seemed sharper, the rustle of branches in the breeze, the crack of a twig beneath some unseen foot, the cry of a jay echoing above. The men drew closer together, shields angled slightly, their formation instinctively tightening. Though the road was clear, the world beyond its edges was thick with mystery. As you imagine walking with them, you can feel the steady pull of the shield against your arm, the slow weight of the pack across your shoulders. The air smells of pine resin and damp soil, rich and earthy. The sound of footsteps blends with the faint creak of leather and the occasional call of a command passed forward. You glance to the side where the forest thickens into shadows, and though you see nothing, you remain aware of its presence. In that silence, you are reminded that the frontier was never fully tamed. It remained a threshold, a meeting of order and uncertainty. By late afternoon, the commander chose a clearing where the road widened to establish the night's camp. The men moved quickly, for the routine was as natural as breathing. Some dug shallow ditches around the perimeter, others drove stakes, while others gathered wood from the edges of the clearing. Within an hour, the outlines of a camp stood in place, rows of tents aligned neatly, fires glowing with warmth, guards posted at the edges. The familiarity of the ritual calmed men, for routine itself was a shield against unease. As the evening deepened, smoke drifted upward from cooking fires, carrying with it the scent of lentils boiling with herbs, barley simmering in pots. Men sat in small groups, bowls balanced in their hands, eating in quiet conversation. A game of dice began at one fire, the soft clatter of bones striking wood punctuated by murmured laughter. Nearby, another soldier bent over his wax tablet, stylus scratching words that would someday travel far, perhaps never read, but written nonetheless. The camp was alive with small tasks and quiet companionship, each act grounding the men in the present moment. Night gathered slowly, the forest growing darker, the air cooler. Now the fires glowed warmly, their light flickering against shields and helmets stacked neatly in piles. Watchmen walked their slow circuits at the edges of camp, eyes scanning the shadows, ears attuned to every rustle. From the trees the call of owls echoed, and in the distance the low, haunting cry of a wolf carried across the night air. The men inside their tents lay wrapped in their cloaks, the earth firm beneath them, slumber coming in light waves, never fully deep, always ready to break at the smallest sound. No alarm came that night. The forest remained still, the shadows undisturbed. Yet the shadow of rebellion seemed to linger nonetheless, like a presence without form. It lived not in the strike of an enemy, but in the silence, in the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. It whispered in the minds of the men as they drifted in and out of rest, reminding them that peace was always provisional, always waiting for its test. At dawn, the camp stirred again. Fires were rekindled, bread reheated on flat stones, flasks refilled at the stream. Tents were struck, stakes pulled from the earth, packs strapped once more. The column formed as it had the day before, shields resting against arms, sandals laced firmly. Once again, the steady rhythm began, the endless cadence of steps carrying them onward into the vastness of the frontier. Each day of marching blurred into the next, a cycle of movement, pause, and movement again. The road stretched on, a line across fields, forests, and hills. Villages greeted them with wary eyes, some with offerings of bread and wine, others with little more than silence. The soldiers accepted what was given, moved on where nothing was offered, always carrying the same message: Rome remained. The empire's reach had not withdrawn, and so they marched, not to win glory, not to carve new lands, but to embody endurance. Their journey was into uncertainty, where the shadow of rebellion hovered unseen, yet in their footsteps lay a kind of strength, a quiet resilience that did not need triumph to endure. They were the watchers of the road, the guardians of presence, the living thread binding the empire to its edges. As the road stretched endlessly before them, disappearing into horizons not yet known, they carried on, step after step, breath after breath, shield against shoulder, pack against back. The march was not only through land, but through time itself. Each day, another mark in the long, unending story of Rome's fragile hold on its frontier. Part 10. Dreams of home in distant Rome. As the column of soldiers trudged onward, the road stretching endlessly beneath them, the rhythm of their footsteps seemed to echo not only through the land, but also through the mind. The frontier was vast, and yet within each man, the world of home remained vivid, alive in memory, soft and intangible as the morning mist along the river. These were the moments between the steps, the quiet spaces that allowed thoughts to wander beyond the present, to drift like leaves on a slow river carrying images of faraway streets, familiar scents, and the faces of those left behind. Imagine yourself there, shoulder pressed against the weight of your pack, shield balanced at your side, and for a moment letting your mind slip beyond the dust and stone. You can see the sun spilling over tiled roofs, the chatter of merchants in the marketplace, the smell of baked bread carried on warm air, mingling with the scent of herbs and oil from the kitchens. Perhaps a fountain splashes somewhere in a small courtyard, its water cool and steady, a sound as gentle as the pulse of your own heart. These were the lives waiting elsewhere, lives that seemed suspended in time, untouched by the march, the cold, or the shadows of rebellion. For many soldiers, such dreams were a secret comfort. They allowed the imagination to wander, filling the long hours with something almost tangible, something that reminded them of why the march, the discipline, the endless presence at the edge of the empire mattered at all. Some recalled the laughter of children at play, the soft glow of evening lamps in familiar homes, or the whispered voices of lovers speaking in rooms heavy with the scent of perfumed oils. Others remembered the simple warmth of a hearth, the quiet routine of morning rituals, or the distant songs of festivals, celebrated long ago in cities the soldiers might never see again. Even as the body endured the road, blistered and aching, the mind could slip into these gentle recollections, sustaining the spirit. The march had its cadence, its discipline, but memory had its own rhythm, slower, more reflective, weaving a soft counterpoint to the constant movement. The soldiers often shared pieces of this inner world, but always in whispers, like threads of music carried across a campfire. Do you remember the smell of fresh rain on cobblestones, one might ask? Or the taste of figs at market? Another would nod quietly, eyes on the horizon, letting the memory mingle with the wind and the soft clatter of sandals against stone. Nightfall brought these dreams closer. In temporary camps, as tents rose from the soil and fires glowed against the darkness, the men lay in their cloaks, allowing their bodies to rest while the mind traveled elsewhere. Some stared at the stars through the open flaps of canvas, tracing constellations they had learned in childhood, wondering if they shone as brightly above their home cities. Others closed their eyes, letting the rhythm of the march and the gentle murmur of fellow soldiers carry them into imagined streets and familiar rooms. The frontier faded, if only for a few hours, replaced by the warmth of memory, the softness of home, and the invisible comfort of distant Rome. The letters some men carried became conduits for these journeys of the mind. Wax tablets and scraps of parchment held words meant for families, friends, lovers, or distant commanders. When read quietly by firelight, each letter unfolded worlds not yet touched by the dust of roads or the chill of wind. The scratching of stylus across wax was more than communication. It was a bridge across miles, a quiet affirmation that the life beyond the frontier still existed, tangible and awaited. Some letters were read aloud softly among trusted comrades, the words echoing against canvas and wood, mingling with the scent of cooking fires and the distant cry of a night bird. In these moments, the soldiers were not only Roman warriors but men caught between two worlds, the one behind them with its comfort, warmth, and certainty, and the one before them, stretching endlessly into forests, hills, and villages where allegiance was uncertain, and peace was always fragile. To hold both in mind was both burden and balm. The frontier demanded vigilance, yet memory demanded nothing but attention, allowing each man to rest without abandoning his duty. Even the smallest items could awaken the sense of home. Pendant hanging from a cord, a ring tucked into a pocket, a small carved figurine brought from a distant city. Each carried stories, histories, fragments of places that could not be reached by marching alone. Soldiers would finger these tokens while walking, letting the shapes, textures, and even faint scents transport them temporarily from the dust and chill of the road. They whispered histories of Rome, personal histories, and in doing so tied themselves to something larger than the immediate hardships of the march. Occasionally dreams of home and Rome merged with the landscape around the frontier. A rolling hill reminded a man of the Campania, a river bend mirrored one near the Tiber, a grove of olive-like trees evoked gardens left behind. These associations softened the unfamiliar land, overlaying it with familiar patterns, shapes, and scents. The frontier became not merely a place of duty, but a canvas upon which memories painted familiar, comforting images. The mind could wander, finding solace in continuity, even as the body endured discomfort, uncertainty, and the ever-present watch of rebellion. Companionship made these journeys of memory possible. Soldiers shared stories, hummed quiet tunes from the cities they came from, or recounted rituals and festivals long past. They spoke of small joys, the taste of a fresh fig, the laugh of a child in a Roman alley, the quiet of a courtyard just before dawn. These shared recollections formed bonds as necessary as the shields they carried, offering mental sustenance when the road demanded physical endurance. And yet, even in shared memory, each man's imagination traveled differently, reflecting personal hopes, regrets, and desires. Dreams of home also tempered the edge of fear, the knowledge that life continued elsewhere, families waiting, markets bustling. Temples standing reminded soldiers of what they protected and why their watch mattered. It gave a quiet purpose to the daily routines, the marches, the patrols, and the night watches. They were not merely guardians of stone walls, but keepers of continuity, the unseen thread linking distant cities to the frontier's fragile peace. The frontier, with its forests, rivers, and villages, seemed less imposing when overlaid with these dreams. Shadows softened, winds smelled sweeter, and the pace of the march, though constant, carried a measure of meditation. Step by step, the soldiers moved through space and memory, carrying both their duties and the echoes of home. The dual rhythm became a comfort, the present and the remembered intertwined, each supporting the other. As the sun rose on another day of marching, the landscape stretched before them. Indifferent, yet filled with subtle beauty. The shimmer of light across river water, the gentle sway of grass, the distant peaks softened by haze. Each moment offered new detail for memory to latch onto, for imagination to cultivate. Soldiers noticed small things: a patch of wildflowers by the roadside, a bird perched silently on a fence, the cool shadow beneath a tree. These observations, though seemingly trivial, grounded them, helping the mind remain calm and attentive even in the uncertainty of the frontier. By evening, the temporary camp arose once more, tents pitched in orderly lines, fires lit with careful precision. Soldiers gathered in small groups, speaking softly or sitting in reflective silence, letting the events of the day drift away as their thoughts turned homeward. Some traced constellations, some wrote letters, others simply closed their eyes, allowing the rhythm of the march to settle into their dreams. The frontier receded, at least temporarily, replaced by imagined streets, courtyards, and homes, whose warmth seemed tangible against the chill of the night air. Sleep, when it came, was gentle but always conscious. A soldier's rest was never fully unguarded. The mind remained lightly attuned to sounds beyond the tent. Yet even this light vigilance could be tempered by memory, by dreams of the familiar, by the soft reassurance of distant Rome. In this way, the march was both journey and refuge, the frontier both place of duty and canvas for imagination. And so the days passed, one into the next, each mile carrying soldiers farther from what they knew, yet ever closer in spirit to the homes they remembered. The march was long, the frontier vast, and the shadow of rebellion never far. Yet in the spaces between steps, in the quiet of temporary camps, in the flicker of firelight and the soft touch of memory, the soldiers found something enduring, a link to the world they served, a reminder of what they protected, and a gentle comfort that made each step a little lighter, each night a little softer. Mile by mile, through forests and fields, across rivers and fields, the soldiers carried Rome with them, not only in the shields they bore or the roads they walked, but in their dreams, in the quiet spaces where home and frontier coexisted, and in the slow, steady rhythm of endurance. Part 11. The weight of duty. The frontier was never still. Yet in its stillness, it carried a weight that pressed not only upon the land, but also upon the shoulders of those who walked it. For the Roman soldier, each day brought the silent reminder of responsibility, a responsibility not only to the empire, but to the comrades. Beside him, to the fragile peace that stretched across villages and forests, to the unseen lives that depended in small ways upon the steady presence of discipline and order. As you walk along the winding road with them, you begin to feel the subtle pull of duty, quiet yet unyielding, settling into your own step, shaping the rhythm of breath and thought. The march continues in its gentle cadence, the sun filtering through high branches, casting dappled light across worn sandals and the dust of the road. Each step carries the echo of countless others who have walked these paths before, their weight embedded in the soil, in the stones, in the very air. The soldiers know that the frontier is measured not only in distance, but in vigilance. Every glance along the tree line, every adjustment of armor, every repositioning of a pack or a shield is a small act of attention, an offering of care to the delicate balance that keeps the border from tipping toward chaos. As the column moves forward, the men reflect silently on the duties that have shaped their lives. A centurion, looking ahead to the distant hills, contemplates the delicate choreography of command. He knows that every order carries consequences, some visible, some unseen. A misjudged placement of troops along a narrow pass could leave the flank vulnerable. A missed opportunity to console a weary recruit might erode trust over days or weeks. The weight of these decisions is quiet but persistent, pressing upon the mind like the straps of a pack that has been worn for too long. The younger soldiers, meanwhile, feel duty in a more immediate sense. Their muscles ache with the repetition of marching, their lungs fill with the scent of dust and damp earth, and yet, beneath the physical strain, there is the constant awareness that they are part of something larger. Their every movement contributes to the safety of the unit, to the maintenance of order along the frontier, to the slow, deliberate assertion of Rome's presence. The road teaches them patience and attentiveness. The distance between where they are and the lands behind them and ahead of them emphasizes the delicate balance of reliance and responsibility. Even the smallest actions take on weight in this context, adjusting a strap too tightly, setting a pack down with care, or placing a campfire in a safe position. These gestures, almost mundane, are imbued with significance. Each soldier learns that duty is not only about great gestures or heroic deeds, It is about mindfulness in the ordinary, about tending to the details that prevent disorder, discomfort, or harm. In this way, the frontier shapes not only the body, but also the mind, cultivating attentiveness and quiet self-discipline that will endure far beyond the march. The weight of duty also includes vigilance over the landscape itself. Forests, rivers, hills, and plains hold subtle signs that the trained eye cannot ignore. A fresh track in soft earth, a broken branch along the road, a subtle shift in the sound of birds. These are not simply elements of nature, but messages waiting to be read. Soldiers move with attention, scanning for patterns, decoding the quiet language of the land. There is no urgency in this observation, only the calm awareness that life on the frontier demands constant care, and that every small oversight can ripple outward in ways unseen until it is too late. Camp life continues to reflect this careful attentiveness. Tents rise in neat order, fires burn steadily, sentries walk slow circuits around the perimeter. Meals are prepared, shared quietly among small groups. Each man conscious not only of his own sustenance, but also of the needs of those around him. It is a delicate balance, to nurture oneself, while remaining alert to the well-being of others. In these quiet moments, duty takes on a human face, expressed in gestures as simple as sharing water, passing bread, or adjusting a comrade's blanket against the chill of night. Even as they move and work, soldiers carry the moral weight of their presence. Their duty is as much symbolic as practical. 2 villages, distant farms, and scattered settlements. The march of Roman soldiers signifies stability, the promise that law and order persist even at the edges of the empire. The men may never witness the immediate effects of their presence, but they are aware that every day of vigilance, every careful placement of a post, every measured response to rumor or unrest contributes to a larger, enduring structure. This understanding fosters a quiet pride, not loud or boastful, but serene and persistent, like a river flowing beneath winter ice. The centurions understand that their weight of duty extends beyond the frontier itself. They carry the trust of distant Rome, where plans are made in marble halls and decisions executed in bronze. Orders flow outward from these centers, often distant and abstract, yet they rest upon the shoulders of men standing watch in forests and fields, far removed from the city's streets. A failure to uphold discipline here could echo in ways that no one could fully predict. And so in the stillness between marches, between meals, between the small rituals of camp, life, a quiet reflection takes hold. That the empire exists not only in grand battles or political decrees, but in the steady, unbroken presence of men willing to endure, observe, and act with care. The road itself serves as a teacher of duty. Its monotony sharpens focus, its unpredictability demands patience, and its endurance mirrors the larger task of guarding the frontier. Each mile teaches the men to carry themselves with attention, to conserve energy while remaining ready, to read subtle changes in the environment, to care for both pack and comrade. Step after step, footfall after footfall, the frontier instills a rhythm that becomes inseparable from the sense of responsibility that defines life at the edge of empire. Nightfall brings its own lessons in duty. Fires glow warmly in the camp, but shadows linger at the edges, soft yet suggestive of unseen risks. Sentries walk slow circuits, each footstep measured, each glance purposeful. The men within tents feel the presence of these guardians, a quiet assurance that the responsibility to protect continues, even in rest. Sleep is tempered by awareness, yet the knowledge of preparation allows relaxation. There is a paradoxical comfort in the weight of duty. It demands vigilance. It provides security, shaping the soldier's world into a careful balance of effort and reassurance. Even the rituals of faith reflect the weight of duty. Small offerings to Mars or Fortuna, whispered prayers at sunrise, gestures toward ancestors or local spirits. These acts are both spiritual and practical. They remind the soldiers of limits beyond themselves, of forces that guide and protect. They encourage mindfulness, reflection, and the cultivation of a calm resolve. softening the burden of responsibility while affirming its importance. The frontier, with all its uncertainty, becomes a landscape not only of duty, but of meaning. A quiet interplay between action, observation, and contemplation. Conversations among the men reflect this awareness. Words are few but measured, often philosophical in their gentle way. "The road teaches more than the hall ever could," one soldier murmurs. Another replies softly, "And yet it is here we must walk, always careful, always awake." In these exchanges, the weight of duty is shared, a communal burden that fosters cohesion and understanding. The soldiers rely on one another, not only for survival, but for the reassurance that their care, attentiveness, and vigilance have purpose, that their steps leave traces that matter, even when the horizon stretches endlessly. The frontier also reminds men that duty is not always heroic in obvious ways. It is expressed in small kindnesses: tending a fevered comrade, sharing water with a thirsty mule, tending a fire that will warm another man in the night. These acts, seemingly insignificant, echo outward, sustaining the delicate order of the camp, the cohesion of the column, and the unseen threads of civilization extended into distant lands. It is here, in quiet care and measured attention, that the true weight of duty is felt, subtle, persistent, and profound. And so, the soldiers march onward, hour after hour, day after day, their bodies weary, but their minds alert. The horizon stretches ahead, uncertain, yet defined by the steady line of men who carry both themselves and the empire forward. Each footfall is a meditation, each camp a small testament to endurance. Each interaction a reaffirmation of the fragile, persistent presence of Rome at the edge of the world. By the time twilight softens the landscape, the men have reached another temporary resting place. Fires glow, the scent of cooking fills the cool evening air, and soldiers gather close to share warmth, food, and quiet conversation. The night stretches long, and in its darkness, the weight of duty persists, but not as burden alone. It is companionship, shared vigilance, and the calm knowledge that their care keeps both themselves and others safe. Sleep comes slowly, softened by reflection and the steady rhythm of a day spent in mindful attention, the weight of duty both present and comforting. Step by step, mile by mile, across forests, fields, and rivers, the soldiers carry Rome with them, in their shields, their packs, their watchful eyes, and in the unspoken, persistent care they give one another. The weight of duty is never gone. It rests gently upon them like a cloak, steadying, grounding, and guiding them into the uncertain days that lie ahead. Part 12. Reflections at the edge of empire. As the march softens and the horizon stretches into a quiet haze of distant hills and fading light, the soldiers reach the edge of what the empire claims. Yet the world beyond remains untamed, gentle, and mysterious. Here, in the soft embrace of twilight, the rhythm of the march begins to slow, and the men, though still alert, allow themselves moments of introspection. It is at this border between the known and the unknown that reflection comes naturally. A meditation upon a life lived both for duty and for the private spaces of memory, imagination, and quiet wonder. Imagine yourself walking among them, each step carrying the familiar weight of pack, shield, and sword. The road beneath your feet is worn, the soil compacted by countless journeys of soldiers who have come before. And yet, despite the wear, there is beauty in the texture of the earth, the soft undulation of hills, and the gentle whisper of wind through grasses and trees. It is in these subtleties that the frontier speaks, not with force or drama, but in gentle tones that invite attention and reflection. The camp rises at dusk, a temporary settlement against the vastness of the land. Tents of canvas and leather stand in quiet order, fires glow warmly, and the scent of cooking mingles with the earthy fragrance of soil and leaves. Here soldiers pause in their routines to observe, to rest, to consider the life they lead at the empire's edge. Man carries not only the memories of home and the demands of duty, but also the weight of presence, the knowledge that their vigilance maintains stability in lands far removed from the marble streets of Rome. Some look outward, over rivers and forests, imagining the lands beyond, where settlements hum with life unknown to them. The trees sway, the rivers murmur, and the hills rise and fall in gentle rhythm. The frontier seems almost eternal, stretching into the distance without immediate threat, yet always reminding them that peace is maintained by quiet, consistent attention. There is a serenity here, but also a subtle tension, a gentle reminder that their role, though often unseen, carries meaning. In these quiet moments, men reflect upon the nature of service and the passage of time. Each march, each night watch, each simple gesture of care toward a comrade is part of a continuum, a living thread that connects them to those who marched before and those who will follow. They are part of a story larger than themselves, a quiet narrative of endurance, discipline, and the subtle assertion of order upon a vast and sometimes indifferent world. The weight of responsibility remains, but it has taken on a softer texture. Duty is no longer a pressing force alone. It is a framework, a rhythm that organizes thought and action, guiding the body and mind through each day. Soldiers notice how the smallest details matter. The positioning of a tent, the careful tending of a fire, the adjustment of a pack for a friend's comfort. These acts, repeated countless times, become meditative, offering both purpose and a quiet sense of achievement. Memory mingles with observation, and soldiers often drift inward, recalling distant homes, familiar streets, and faces that persist in imagination. A soft breeze might carry the imagined scent of a distant bakery, the sound of children at play, or the muted echo of a song sung long ago. These reveries bring warmth and solace, blending the harsh reality of frontier life with the comfort of remembered places. Even the smallest tokens, a carved charm, a ring, a scrap of parchment, can evoke a world untouched by dust, wind, and the long hours of marching. Yet reflection is not solely backward-looking. Soldiers also contemplate the present and the future, understanding that the stability of the empire depends on steady, thoughtful action at this quiet edge. They consider the ways in which their vigilance sustains not only the safety of their unit, but also the well-being of villagers, travelers, and scattered settlements. In small, often invisible ways, they are guardians of continuity, caretakers of order, and witnesses to the delicate balance between civilization and wilderness. The rhythm of camp life contributes to this reflection. Fires crackle softly. Small groups share bread and conversation. Sentries walk slow circuits with measured steps. Night deepens, stars appear overhead, and the landscape settles into an almost imperceptible hush. Soldiers listen to the wind, the soft murmur of rivers, the distant call of animals, and in this stillness, their thoughts unfold like gentle rivers themselves. Some think of comrades lost along the way, their presence remembered in silence, their absence honored by careful attention to routine and shared reflection. Others contemplate the long line of men who will come after, wondering how these same roads will shape their experiences, their dreams, their reflections. The weight of duty, memory, and presence merges with an awareness of impermanence. Soldiers know that the frontier is both enduring and fragile, that the empire's reach is long, yet its hold is never absolute. This awareness fosters humility, a recognition that their lives, though bounded by discipline, are part of something far larger and more enduring than themselves. They learn that peace is maintained not through singular acts of heroism, but through countless quiet moments of attentiveness, care, and reflection. In conversation, voices are soft, measured, almost musical in their cadence. One man might recount the layout of a street in Rome, another, the slow passage of a river in a distant province. They share memories of meals, festivals, or family gatherings, allowing the mind to wander across time and space. These exchanges are not lively or animated. They are gentle, contemplative, and restorative. Each story, each recollection, offers a subtle bridge between the vast unknown of the frontier and the familiar constancy of human experience. Some moments of reflection are purely personal, unshared, and private. A soldier may trace a finger over a carved token, thinking of a family member far away. A Close his eyes and imagine the soft light falling across a familiar room. These private meditations are nourishments of the spirit, sustaining men in a life where the physical world is often demanding, uncertain, and uncomfortable. Here at the edge of empire, the mind finds balance in memory, ritual, and the deliberate awareness of small, deliberate actions. The natural world contributes to this reflection as well. Rise and fall of hills, the gentle ripple of rivers, the whisper of grasses in the breeze, and the quiet sounds of nocturnal creatures all shape a sensory backdrop that calms and centers the mind. Soldiers notice these subtleties, often in ways unspoken, finding in them both solace and a gentle reminder of the broader world beyond duty, beyond the road, and beyond the immediate horizon. As night deepens, sleep approaches in slow, gentle waves. The rhythm of the day's march, the attention paid to duty, the shared camaraderie, and the quiet reflections on home and the frontier converge to create a state of calm. Soldiers rest, their minds and bodies softened by the repetition, the reflection, and the quiet acceptance of presence. Even in a world defined by duty, vigilance, and distance from familiar comforts, they find moments of peace, brief, meditative, and deeply human. The edge of empire is a place of contrasts. It is vast, yet intimate, challenging, yet quietly nurturing, distant, yet intimately connected to the hearts and minds of men who walk its roads. Soldiers experience the tension between what is known and unknown, between memory and presence, between duty and reflection. In this tension, a gentle equilibrium forms, a rhythm that sustains life, imagination, and spirit, and allows for a meditation upon both the fragility and the persistence of human endeavor. In these concluding hours of the day, soldiers look at one another, noticing the subtle signs of fatigue, contentment, or quiet contemplation. There is an understanding in these glances, a silent acknowledgement of shared experience, of endurance, of commitment. Words are few, but the presence is sufficient. Together, they occupy a world that is both demanding and gentle, both distant from home and deeply connected to memory, imagination, and quiet reflection. Finally, as the night deepens and the stars shine with gentle constancy above, the soldiers allow themselves to rest fully. The fires burn low, the sentries maintain their slow, measured patrols, and the column of men sleeps in unison with the rhythm of the frontier. Dreams of home, of Rome, of distant streets, and familiar scents mingle with reflections on duty, presence, and the passage of time. The edge of empire, vast and untamed, becomes a canvas for meditation, memory, and the gentle weaving together of life's many threads. Step by step, mile by mile, through forests and plains, across rivers and hills, the soldiers have carried not only shields and packs, but also the weight of reflection, the solace of memory, and the quiet, enduring rhythm of duty. Here, at the edge of empire, life and thought converge into a gentle harmony, a rhythm designed to soothe, sustain, and guide, allowing men to rest with the knowledge that even in uncertainty, presence, care, and reflection endure.